Hi, this is Matt McCormick. I'm in the Department of Philosophy at the California State University, Sacramento. This is a lecture for my Inductive Logic Phil 61 course, and we've been reading Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. We're covering chapters 30 through 32 today. This is part of a series where we're learning how to make better decisions. Okay, so we're trying to make good decisions. What's that mean? Well, look, we want to make good decisions and achieve our goals. And we've sort of followed along with the standard practice here of understanding instrumental rationality, understanding rationality as meaning you want to, whatever your goals might be, you want to enact or pursue those means that will best achieve them. To not do that is fundamentally irrational. To try to find the means that work to get you your goals is just what it means to have goals and be rational. And it wouldn't make sense to chase after or enact or pursue some means that don't achieve your goals. So whatever your goals might be, we're just talking about leaving that open. You want to do it better. You want to get to them better than you might have otherwise. All right, so what's that mean? Well, here's what's going on in this part of Kahneman's book is that it turns out there's a lot of features about the way our cognitive systems are built that lead us in lots of our decisions, especially when we're looking local. We're looking at the small set of facts or the small experience or the anecdote or the information in front of us that leads us to make poor decisions in the bigger picture. That given that we've got some big goal, like we want to make money, or we want to be happy, or you want to achieve some, some other outcome, the way you go about making those decisions, or the way they get framed, or the way we think about them, or the way we think about low probabilities and high probabilities, or think about the outcomes, distorts how we make the decision. And as a result, we choose the wrong thing, the thing that doesn't get us to that result that we want. So we're trying to identify those biases, those ways in which there's distortions, or the ways in which our thinking is skewed. Sometimes he refers to these more favorably as heuristics. These are shorthand, quick rules that get us to solutions. They may not be ones that we're consciously aware of. It's just the way our system works. Our system makes decisions in certain ways, and we can now empirically study and look at that and figure out the ways in which it goes off the rails or achieves suboptimal results. Okay, so let's talk about rare events then. Here's a couple of comments, a couple of quotes from Kahneman that kind of capture the heart of what he has to say in this chapter about rare events. Emotion and vividness influence fluency, availability, and judgments of probability, and thus account for our excessive response to the few rare events that we do not ignore. Okay, so rare events have this weird effect on us. Rare events are rare, they don't happen very often. But if they're vivid, if they're emotional, especially if they're portrayed that way, or if they're ones that make a big difference to us, we tend to inflate them and distort them, and they occupy a big, oversized footprint in our thinking when we make decisions, when maybe, since they're rare events, they ought to be demoted, ought to be de-inflated. He also says, focal attention and salience contribute to both the overestimation of unlikely events and the overweighting of unlikely outcomes. So I'm going to talk about what overestimation and overweighting are in a second. Salience is enhanced by the mere mention of an event. I just bring it up, and now its vividness, and by the format in which the probability is described. It just doesn't take much to get people in your thinking, to say it to them or frame it or present it to them, or the way they think about it, for them to take a little event and make it big probabilities, make it big outcomes, when they shouldn't. So it occupies this much bigger inflated space in their heads. Okay, so let's talk about those two phenomena. The first one he describes as overestimation, and this is just a straight up point about us estimating probabilities. We inflate the probability of unlikely events, especially when the alternative is not specified. So I just mentioned lightning strikes, or I just mention, some obscure possibility, and just thinking about it makes us inflate the probability that will happen. And there's lots of good evidence, good empirical evidence that shows the phenomena, but here's a really good illustration of it. Kahneman cites a study where they asked people to estimate the chance that each of 8 different NBA basketball teams will win the playoffs. And their guesses added up to 240%. So they didn't quite see it that way, but they asked him first, okay, what are the chances the Lakers will win? What are the chances, the other team will win? And he went down the line and had them individually evaluate and think about each of 8 teams. And as they were thinking about the team, because they're thinking about the Lakers, well, they say, oh, well, 40% chance that team's going to win. And 40% chance the Thunder's going to win when you're thinking about the Thunder or you're thinking about the other team. So what they're not realizing, what they're not doing and not zooming out is they're realizing that, hey, I don't have more than 100% to distribute here. But when people just think about the individual teams, they give them more because they're thinking about the team. It's vivid. And you're not thinking about the alternative. You're not thinking about the big picture. Because if you were reminded, okay, you've got 8 teams here and all of them have to add up to 100, then people would rein themselves in. And a lot of what these chapters are about is Kahneman drawing our attention to this fact that when you're down in a consideration, when you're thinking about some option, you're thinking about it, and it becomes big and vivid and powerful and emotional, or has this big footprint in your mind, and the other things get included, and you don't think about that. And very often, what we need to do is zoom out. We take what he calls the outside view. We take the big picture. We get outside of our own head and think about the bigger situation here. When you do that, you can correct for some of these mistakes. So overestimation is just judging the probability of events when we have no stake involved, and we tend to overestimate them. And then overweighting is people overweight unlikely events in their decisions. That is, the decision weight is how much money or real import we put on it when there are actual stakes on our probability judgments. The prospect of winning or losing invokes mechanisms that distort our response curve. And so you'll remember this diagram from Kahneman's book. The bottom line here shows these two ways in which our decision weights are skewed. That when there's a low probability like 1, we treat it as if it's 5, and when there's a high probability like 99, we treat that as if it's 91. So there's this weird skewing that happens where we overweight or underweight depending on what's happening. So what's happening here is that focused attention on the topic, confirmation bias, cognitive ease, among other things, contribute to both overestimation of probabilities and the overweighting of the outcomes that we're thinking about in those instances. So for an econ, which is, you'll recall, Kahneman's term for somebody who's sort of strictly rational in the classic sense, the classic economic theory sense, somebody who has no feelings and somebody who doesn't have any of these distortions, has no limbic system, it just makes cold calculations according to strict probabilities. The probabilities and the decision weights that you attach to some decision are exactly the same. There's no deviation from those two. So those two lines would be exactly the same for an econ. But for humans, we skew and distort both at both ends of the spectrum. The only place we get it right, ironically, strangely, that actually isn't shown on this diagram is at around 35%. When we're estimating that probability, we do pretty well. Okay, so we're talking about vividness and the way that it distorts our view about rare events. Humans skew probabilities here really powerfully, and needless to say, being an actual victim of terrorism is exceedingly unlikely. It's astronomically rare. But you can see here's a chart where people's actual fear, where the percentage of people who are somewhat or very worried about terrorism, moves around from being in the low 30s to being up in the 40%. So there's people who are having worries that are, grossly out of distorted or grossly out of whack with the actual realities of these phenomena, where asthma or car accidents or staph infections at the hospital or botulism or 100 of other much more mundane risks pose much more serious hazards to your life than terrorism. But this is the thing that people are wringing their hands about because it's vivid, because it's so salient, because it's on the news, because it's so emotional, because it has such a powerful hold in our minds. A rich and vivid representation of the outcome, whether or not it's emotional, it need not just be emotional, reduces the role of probability in the evaluation of an uncertain prospect. So the more richly and vividly we represent it, and including if we make it emotional, the bigger it gets in our heads, and and then the more we disregard its actual probability. Okay, so here's an example, a much simpler example. So imagine I did give you these two descriptions. I'm going to give you a 21% chance to receive $59 next Monday, or we'll give you a 21% chance to receive a large blue cardboard envelope containing $59 next Monday morning. So in the second case, it's described much more vividly, much more accurately, more details. And what happened is that you constructed the event in your mind, and the vividness of the second description makes us less sensitive to its actual probability. So you'll treat that 21 as higher because you've got more details and you can see it. You can see that large blue cardboard envelope, and you can imagine this happening on Monday morning, and that makes you treat that 21 as greater. So Kahneman also points out that cognitive ease here contributes to the effect as well, that when you hold a vivid image of an event, the possibility of it's not occurring is also represented vividly, because you're thinking about getting that $59, and that makes you less able to imagine not getting the $59. The possibility it's not occurring is also represented vividly and overweighted. So you inflate or overweight this chance that it's not going to occur. You think of that sort of more vividly. That is, you picture not getting, you picture it not happening more vividly, and as a result, you're less able to think about it's not happening. All right, so that's how vividness contributes to our distortion about rare events. And here's another example. This one's really remarkable when you look at the data on this. They give these choices to lots of people in studies. So imagine I'm going to give you a choice. You're going to reach into an urn, and if you draw out a white marble, I'm going to give you $1,000. Okay, so which urn do you want to choose from? Urn A has got 10 marbles in it. 8 of them are red and 2 are white. Okay, so you could get $1,000 by getting one of those. Or urn B has got 100 marbles, 85 are red and 15 are white. Which urn do you draw from? Okay, now a moment's reflection makes it obvious that your odds are better if you choose from urn A. 20% of the white marbles in urn A are white. So you see that urn A is the right one to draw from. But here's an interesting sort of minority result, is that 30 to 40% of people actually choose B because B has got more white marbles in it. That is, they're able to more vividly represent those 15 white marbles. It seems like if I reach in there and there's 15 of them, it's more likely I'm going to get one of them, even though proportionally there's fewer of them. Percentage-wise, there's few of them in urn B. So the fact that 30 to 40% of people choose B and sort of don't see that, they kind of quickly make this snap judgment, shows how that vividness gets this traction in our minds and makes us distort, makes us make the wrong decision. So this is all about how rare events and vivid events, among other things, frame in our heads and have this effect on the way we think about the decision, and it affects what we do. So in this case, I choose from one urn rather than another, and I made the wrong decision. That is, if I'm in the 30 to 40%, I actually made the wrong decision. If I reached into urn B because I was thinking about those 15 white marbles, I made the wrong decision. Now, I might have gotten a white marble from urn B, and I might have thought I made the right decision, but in fact, objectively, statistically, it's provable that I made the wrong decision there, right? So here's an example where these features of our psychologies throw us off and skew or distort or bias the actual decisions we make, and they end up giving us results or outcomes from our decisions that aren't the ones we wanted or aren't the ones we were seeking after. Okay, so if the probability is vivid, the big lesson here is it distorts our decisions. Here's another example, and this one's more scary. Imagine the doctor describes it this way. Imagine that 10% of patients like this will have another heart attack. Imagine the doctor says it this way, or the patient hears it this way, or imagine we say it this way. Out of 100 patients like Jones, 10 will have another heart attack. Okay, now depending on how you describe that, whether you describe it according to A or B, you'll get a different diagnostic decision from a doctor, and you'll get patients asking for different results in their medical care. The vivid description in B of imagining 10 people with heart attacks will lead the doctor, if that's the way the doctor was thinking about it, if that's the way the doctor said it, imagine that you've got your doctor and you have a consulting doctor who comes in who's a heart attack expert. And there's you sitting in the emergency room, and there's your doctor, and then there's the consulting doctor. And depending on whether the consulting doctor says A or says B, the two of you, you and your doctor, are going to be led to make different decisions. You're going to think about your risk of heart attack differently. You're going to think it's more serious in B. You might be led to take medication. You might be led to take surgery. You might be led to stay in the hospital. You might be led to do any number of interventions because B is more vivid. And the only difference in the two situations, the only probabilistic difference in these two cases, is that the doctor who came in to visit described the same fact in these two different ways. One of them more vivid than the other, that has this effect on you and changes your decision outcome. All right, so that's a pretty serious outcome, a pretty serious result, that just altering the way we describe the words we use in the sentence can change people's choices in these decisions so much, especially if it matters, especially if it's not called for. Now imagine this one. See, imagine an attorney says the chance of a false DNA match is 0.1%. Or imagine another attorney who's talking about a defendant in a trial says a false match occurs in 1 out of 1,000 capital cases. Okay, so those are two different ways to describe the same fact. A prosecutor in a jury trial would use C, they would say, because the prosecutor is trying to convict the defendant. The prosecutor would say, the chance of a false DNA match is 0.1%. So surely you should convict this person. Whereas the defense attorney would couch this very same fact in terms of D. The defense attorney would say D to lead the jury to acquit. But it's the same fact. It's the same thing being stated two different ways, right? And it's the vividness of D that would give you would lead people to give one answer versus the lack of vividness in C that would lead people to say another. So this brings up another point here. In my original case, I didn't describe any sort of deliberate malfeasance or deliberate manipulation, but attorneys, defense and prosecution attorneys, are trying to manipulate juries by stating things these ways. And you do it too. You do it unknowingly. We all do it. We're constantly being barraged by people who are trying to manipulate our decision making, trying to get us to spend money, trying to get us to do various things that they want us to do, and they're able to skew or bias our answers, our results, or our decisions just by the way that they describe it, just with vividness. Okay, so Kahneman has an answer. Here's part of the problem. When we decide narrowly, locally, when you just look at this little thing in front of you, and he calls that what you see is all there is, we look at the stuff right in front of us, right? That's how we often make our decisions without reflecting on this big picture. But many of these decisions are demonstrably not the best. Okay, so these are narrow-framed decisions, and if you were to zoom out, look at them in the bigger picture, you'd realize that, and you make a different sort of decision. So Kahneman's solution is that you do something called, he calls it adopt a risk policy. All right, so here's what that means. A risk policy, and I'm going to talk about what broad framing is here in a minute, but a risk policy is a broad frame way to make decisions that optimize utility from the outside view or big picture, especially when we're prone to make decisions, worse decisions, make them worse when we only consider them narrowly. All right, so a risk policy is a way to kind of fix us having our head down and looking at these details in front of us, and a way to look at the bigger picture. Okay, so I'll give you an example. And first you can consider that meme to sort of see what's going on here. All right, so here's some examples of risk policies that Kahneman gives. Always take the highest possible deductible when purchasing insurance. Or never buy extended warranties when you're buying electronics. or coupons generally aren't better than buying generic. Manufactured suggested retail prices are anchors to get me to pay more. Ignore MSRPs. Lotteries are a bad deal. Okay, so what does the policy do? These kinds of policies are examples of you sitting down with looking at one lottery decision or one coupon decision or one extended warranty decision and taking a minute to think about it and thinking, now generally what's going on with extended warranties? What's happening there? Well, what's happening with an extended warranty is I go buy a computer at the store and they offer to upgrade or sell me for another $79. I can get the extended warranty that buy me 3 more years of service or whatever, right? Okay, so for me, what's going to happen is even if I get it, I'm not going to keep the paperwork. I'm not going to be able to find the extended warranty. I'm probably not going to fill out the card they want me to send in. I'm not going to send them my email address. I'm going to lose track of it. So the chance that I'm actually going to follow through with one of these extended warranties is pretty low. And what the insurance company is doing is they're playing a big sort of gamble here. They're running the numbers on this, and they're counting how many, in what percentage of cases with people with extended warranties do they actually submit for a claim because they got their laptop stolen or it broke or whatever, and then in what percentage of cases do they actually have to pay out. And then they're doing some math on that and realizing that if we charge $79 for this, and if we get 10,000 people to do it, we're only going to have to pay out X amount. So we're actually going to make a bunch of profit on this. So they pocket that difference and they capitalize on you forgetting, not doing it, or limitations on the warranty, or the warranty not covering it, or any other of various other side issues. Okay, so I know I'm not going to do it. I think it's probably not a good deal. And I can absorb that myself, and I can adopt a policy like never buy extended warranties, which means that on the rare occasion when I do break something or it gets stolen or whatever, I just think to myself, okay, well, I skipped extended warranties, buying extended warranties, 50 times in the last 10 years. So I bypassed spending another 50 or $100 in all 50 of those occasions. So that adds up to thousands of dollars. So this is my day. This is the time that my laptop breaks or that I have to replace it or whatever. And this is the time that the one improbable event happens and I just have to absorb the cost. But that cost is probably going to be lower for me than the other side, which is to buy those extended warranties and then not even have them work in the first place. Okay, so that's some rough reasoning about why you might never buy extended warranties. There might be other reasoning here, but the idea is it's a policy that lets me make quick work of lots and lots of similar decisions where the structures are the same and none of them really work in my advantage or maximize my utility. The policy aggregates the risk, and then you couple it with this mantra, says Kahneman. You win a few, you lose a few. And that effectively gets you the chance to play the game 100 or 1,000 times. You just keep using that policy, and once in a while it'll go wrong on you. But for the most part, it goes to your advantage, and you've got that much more money that stays in your pocket, and you're better off overall, and people haven't taken advantage of you. And you didn't have to waste all this time on the specific decision for each case. Okay, so that's like narrow and broad framing, which is what Kahneman calls it. So imagine narrow framing is just looking at a sequence of like two simple decisions, suppose, considered separately, versus broad framing. He gives some examples, and they're really detailed examples in the book, but imagine you're making a single comprehensive decision with 4 options, or you're looking at the bigger picture and you're enacting a policy. It's a broad framing policy that you've thought about and reasoned about, and now there might be reasons or grounds or circumstances under which I might violate the policy, but the policy, because I've thought about it in terms of a policy instead of piecemeal day-by-day decisions, has got some rationale behind it. And I've, spent some time thinking about it. And now I've got a quick rule that lets me make better decisions, better quality decisions overall. So Kahneman's recommendation is that you aggregate your decisions into policies, you aggregate your life in your partner's life. This is the same reason that you ought to be accumulating or taking full advantage of compound interest over the long term, or you invest a little bit of money every year over many, many decades, and then compound interest adds up in your favor and you ends up having a great big fat retirement account. And of course, in our class, we've been using the expected value calculus, which is this formula, in order to do this aggregation of decisions. That we've adopted this policy in order to maximize utility. I make my decisions according to the expected value calculation, which says, okay, well, the right thing to do, or the right way to compare two different decisions, is to create this weighted average of the outcomes, where I look at the probabilities and the utilities of them, and then I compare how they result over the long run, over the long term, over hundreds or thousands of aggregated instances. That's what expected value theory is doing. Sometimes the unlikely outcome will result. Sometimes you'll lose big, but you can't do better than by playing the long-term probabilities. And it's provable with the expected value calculation. That's what the casino is doing against us when we go into the casino to play a game of chance. That's what insurance companies are doing. That's what actuarial companies are doing. That's what my pension, the CalPERS that hold my pension, that's what they're doing. They're all running the big numbers, and they have this advantage of hundreds or thousands of instances or decades or years of choices, whereas I'm making single decisions. So if I adopt these big policies and take the broad frame, I can maximize or leverage my decisions against these big forces that are working the world around me. Okay, so you win a few, you lose a few. Those are the costs of, but here's another argument for what's wrong with narrow framing. I'll make another pitch for it. So imagine this game. I'll flip a coin. If it comes up heads, you got to pay me $100. If it comes up tails, I'll give you $200. Okay, so should you take that game? Absolutely, you should take that game. It's a really good game. Now, what if somebody offered to play that game for you for 100 rounds? We might be tempted to avoid it in the case of one play, because actually losing $100 once hurts more than $200 feels good. That's that loss aversion endowment effect thing we were talking about. But we see that playing it 100 times is hugely lucrative, right? That is, the expected value of that's $5,000 with only a 1 in 2,300 chance of losing any money. Okay, so here's my point. Playing that game 100 times is going to pay off huge. That's going to net you $5,000. You might, now if you just played it once, you might just lose $100 and you might go, I'm not playing this anymore. That hurts too much. I don't want to risk it. But the argument here is for the big picture policy. That if I zoom out and stop thinking about just this one choice in front of me and start thinking about lots and lots of choices, imagine making that choice 100 times, it's sure to win, it's sure to pay off, it's going to be really lucrative. Okay, so if that argument works for a single case with a single game, where the stakes are clearly defined like this, the argument works for the bigger picture for different games. Okay, so if you refuse the game once today, and if I pitch you another game that's similar but different, and you refuse it again tomorrow when it comes up in another sort of case, and then the next day you refuse it again in another slightly different circumstance, and again and again. So imagine these different probabilistic sort of games of chance or choices come up in your day, in your life every day. And imagine you played it conservative with the narrow framing every single time. Well, that amounts to you turning down $5,000 in effect. I mean, we can play around with the details, and obviously you encounter different sorts of probabilistic decisions every day, but if every one of them has a broad framing answer that were you to adopt the big risk policy and broad frame it, you would optimize your chance, then it's like it doesn't work out this way, but it's like I offered you up $5,000 and you said no thanks. But the $5,000 is just coming distributed over the next 10 years. Okay, so do future you a favor and give them $5,000. Now maybe it comes in little drips and little bits at a time, but future you could use that $5,000 or that $10,000 or whatever it might be. All right, so that's an argument against narrow framing, an argument for broad framing, and an argument for adopting a risk policy generally, and more specifically, the risk policy we've been endorsing is the expected value calculus. Refusing the small local bets over and over is the same as refusing the larger bundled bets. We just don't think of that way because narrow framing is costing you big dollars. It's just costing you a little bit at a time. There was this chance today where you could have made a few more bucks, and there's a chance tomorrow where you could have kept a few more dollars, and there was a chance in the next day where you could have saved a little time. But since you're narrow framing everything and not seeing the bigger picture, you're losing out on all of those. So by little chunks, you're losing out big picture. Okay, now here's another way in which the way we structure our thoughts and our decision making, we screw up and don't actually optimize our outcomes. Kahneman calls it keeping score. And he's going to use the money example here, but it applies to a lot of things. Okay, so ostensibly, the main motivators of our money seeking, we're after money. We think that, you get a job and you want to know how much does it pay. But actually, it's not necessarily economic. It's often emotional. There's often an emotional component to what's making you go after money. It's self-regard, it's achievement, it's rewards, it's punishments in your head. You think I'm gonna set that money aside to reward me for having a hard week, or I'm gonna give myself an ice cream sundae or whatever. Social incentives, there's fear of failure, there's fear of regret, there's feelings about omission and commission, we'll talk about that in a minute, and feelings of responsibility. All right, so here's the point, that we think and we talk and we imagine that lots of the things, lots of choices we make are in order to acquire money. But actually, in many of those money decisions, what's making us decide one way or another is actually not the bottom line. It's not the dollar value. It's some other emotional thing that's making us frame it a certain way. And as a result, we actually make the wrong decision. Now, that's true of money, which is most vivid, and that's the example that Kahneman uses because he's dealing with financial advisors, but it applies to lots of other things too. Okay, so the point is, suppose your goal is to make more money, whatever your goal might be, but let's just use that one. And you're using this method to make money decisions that actually is getting distorted by emotional needs that actually makes you less money. So look, if your goal is to make money, you want to make money, you make more of it. Why are you making it according to these emotional variables that actually don't get you as much money as you would if you had a more, if you had another approach? Okay, now that's part of this keeping score business in your head, the way you keep score about where your money is and keeping your accounts. So we'll talk about the details of what that is. So here, the decision method that you're using actually defeats the goal. All right, so we'll get to some of those in the next lecture, but for now, let's break it off for this part one of this lecture, chapters 30 through 32. We've talked about rare events and the way that we overestimate and overweight them, and it distorts our thinking. We've talked about vividness in our descriptions and how it skews our decisions about both probabilities and decision weights. We've talked about risk policies and how they can counteract narrow framing, they can counteract the what you see is all there is phenomena, and they can optimize utility. And we've talked about broad versus narrow framing and how broad framing can improve our decisions. And also we've talked about, and I'm going to discuss it some more in the next lecture, about this business of keeping score. The problem is that we maintain mental accounts that distort our decisions. Okay, so that's the end of our discussion for chapters 30 through 32.